this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'll be sharing a fun summary I Need Vitamin C card showing you how to do some simple distress ink watercoloring. I'll be working with two stamp sets today. I have the Pool Play set with an adorable little girl, and also the Sail Away stamp set, and I'll be using the I Need Vitamin C sentiment from here for my card. And this is actually how I feel right now. I need vitamin C and lots of sunshine. I think this is a fun card to give to your husband with a little hint, you know? It's just a fun one to step away from the usual and traditional cards. And by the way, Simon has this little girl, Abby, dressed for several seasons. There's another winter set where she has her winter coat on and her boots, and a spring set, again, with this little girl and an umbrella. So it's kind of fun to see these girls dressed for different seasons, and I think it would be fun to have all three of them on a card. I'll have to do that someday. Anyhow, I'm going to be heat embossing the little girl, watercoloring her, and die cutting her out for my card. The reason I'm going with watercolor here because for me, it's much easier and also a lot faster to watercolor people than to color people with alcohol markers or pencils. Watercolor is very forgiving and you don't need to be an expert to have great results. You do need good paper though. I'm using Arches cold pressed watercolor paper. It's very high quality paper. It literally does the work for you, and I'm heat embossing the top part of this little girl onto my paper. I'm only embossing a top part because I only need the top part of her for this project. I actually have another idea to heat emboss just the bottom part of this image. She's wearing flip-flops there, and I want to use Simon's Life is Better in Flip-Flop sentiment. I think that would also make a great card. I'm using antique gold embossing powder today. I used to heat emboss a lot in white, but I have found I prefer to heat emboss in gold or like an antique gold or rose gold. Anyhow, not in white when I'm heat embossing people. And that makes it easier to color hair. I generally struggle with coloring hair, but when my images are heat embossed in gold or in a color that is close to gold, coloring hair becomes very easy. I don't know why, but I'm happy it is. I'm going to be using my Distress inks to watercolor this little lady today, and I have a piece of clear plastic acetate stored with my inks, and I use it when I'm coloring with Distress. So I just press the ink pad onto the acetate, squeeze some ink onto it, and color. I'm using a large paintbrush and first adding clear water to my image. I'm going to color her skin first, and I'm adding water to help the pigment move on the paper and also to soften the colors. Next, I'm using a water brush to pick up the ink from the acetate and color the image. I'm using scattered straw ink to color her skin. It looks a little yellow at first. It will become lighter once it's dry. And like I said, this girl really needs some of that vitamin C and some of that sunshine. I'm going to use a very light blue tumbled glass ink to color her swimsuit. Doing the same thing here, pressing the ink pad onto the acetate to get a bit of the ink out, using a clean wet brush to add water to the image, and then using my water brush to transfer the ink onto her swimsuit and also onto her mask. I did not wet the mask, and you can see that the same ink is a bit darker there. For her hair, I'm going to use Gathered Twigs Brown Distress ink, and she's going to be a brunette here. I'm not adding water this time. I'm going directly to the paper with the ink, laying the base color, and I will later come in and add some shadows to make it look a bit more realistic. Usually I like to color with my watercolors, but today I wanted to show you that you can watercolor using your Distress inks too. I can also sometimes mix my watercolor paints and my Distress inks. I can use a few colors from the watercolor set. I usually color with the Karatake Gansai Tambi and throw in one or two Distress ink colors, especially the Peacock Feathers. I really love that color and I don't have anything similar like that in my traditional watercolors. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut this cutie out using a matching die. I was planning to trim this a bit and not have the ring at the bottom, but decided to keep it there after all. I'm also going to go ahead and die cut a panel for my card using that same Arches cold pressed watercolor paper. I'm using my stitched rectangle die. This is the second largest one, and trimming a small panel out. I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment here and also do some ink smooshing to create an illusion of water. I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, prep the paper, and stamp the sentiment in clear sticky ink onto the panel. I'm using the little girl die cut and checking if I have enough room there at the bottom and also making sure I'm stamping this in the center of the panel. Using the same antique gold embossing powder again and heat setting the sentiment with my heat tool. Once that's done, I can work on my background. I'm going to go back to my Distress inks and create an ink smooshed background using tumbled glass and peacock feathers. I have a larger piece of clear acetate here, and I'm going to press the tumbled glass ink pad onto the plastic to get some ink out. spray that with water, and transfer the ink onto the panel. I love doing this. I think this is such a great way to get unique looking backgrounds, and you will get a different background every time with this technique. No two backgrounds will ever be alike. So I'm using my heat tool to dry the ink in between the layers. I've added one layer of tumbled glass and then added another layer. And now I'm using peacock feathers and doing the exact same thing. I'm smooshing the ink onto my panel. I'm adding more towards the bottom and a lot less towards the top to make it look like the girl, once I adhere her, is standing in the water. I decided I needed to add a bit more of the lighter color, so I went back to the tumbled glass and smooshed some more of that in the middle of my panel, right over and below the sentiment. So I did say I decided to keep the girl die kit as is and not trim it, so I'm using the peacock feathers ink again and coloring the ring and also adding some highlights to her mask and just checking if the coloring looks good on top of my fake water background. Now this panel warped quite a lot from all the heat and water, so I need to do something to make it flat again. And what I like to do, actually I saw Christina Warner do something similar, so I like to spritz the paper very lightly, just barely mist it with water, then sandwich it in between my cutting or embossing plates and just send it through my die cutting machine a couple of times. The embossing sandwich will give more pressure, but if you don't have the embossing mat for embossing with dies, you can also use the cutting sandwich. And that really does help to flatten the paper quite a bit. I even like to leave the panel in the machine in between the plates for some time if it warped too much. Like let it sit there for 5 or 10 minutes if I'm working on something else. Now to finish this card, I'm going to foam mount the panel onto a light gray card base. Also foam mount the little girl. I really don't like when things are flat on my cards. I always reach out for foam adhesive squares to add some sort of dimension to my projects. I'm also going to add a few clear droplets from Pretty Pink Posh to imitate air bubbles on the card, and I'm going to adhere these using glossy accents. Usually I like to use multi-matte medium adhesive for this because it dries matte, but I was going to use glossy accents to add gloss to her mask, so I used it to adhere the clear drops as well. So finally I added that layer of glossy accents over the mask and let it dry overnight. So this finishes my card, and here's actually another one with a blonde girl. I had tons of fun making these, and I do want to make something similar with the other girl stamps from Simon, the spring one and the winter one. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time. Bye!